For more, we're joined by several guests. From Japan, we go to Eileen Miyoko-Smith, Executive Director of the Kyoto-based group Green Action. And here in the U.S., we're joined in New York by Saburo Kitajima. He's a contract laborer and union organizer from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, accompanied by his English-Japanese translator, Jen Chijiwa. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Eileen Miyoko-Smith, talk about what is happening now in Japan, what people are calling for, the memorial services today.
Well, we had the memorial services, and of course, everybody's in mourning because 1 year ago we lost so many loved ones. And as you mentioned, the recovery is still ongoing, and many areas have not recovered at all. I just spoke with somebody who has evacuated from that area to our region, which is the Osaka-Kyoto area. And he went back home and he went up on the high hills and looked down, and he said it's still the same as it was a year ago. So there are various areas, but lots of rubble has still yet to be cleared. In the Fukushima area, in Fukushima, there are 2 million people living in the prefecture, the state. And about 3/4 of those people are living under levels of very serious radioactive contamination. There are prefectures and hotspots in surrounding areas that also have high levels. About 350,000 children are living under these conditions. And recently, the Japanese government said that it will have an all-out effort to decontaminate Fukushima, the radiation. But that's a long ways away. The decontamination has started, but how effective it can be. Some areas have been decontaminated, only levels of the radiation went down 10%, 20%. And some areas actually were measured higher afterwards. That's because the hillsides bring down the radiation again. But people are trapped there because of this alibi, this word decontamination, because people living 40, 50 miles out from the reactors. This is in, for example, Fukushima City, which is the capital of the state, the prefecture, and another city, Date. These areas are 40, 50 miles away, and they are fighting to be evacuated. They call it the right to evacuate, and that's because they want a compensation from the government if they elect to evacuate, and the government has refused. There hasn't been a cent paid to people who want to self-evacuate except a one-time payment of $1,043, and that's it. And even the people who've officially evacuated have only received a first-time one-off payment of $13,043. This is, you know, you've had to leave your home. You've lost your home for as far as you know, forever maybe, and you're living in limbo in evacuation, and you only receive that amount of money. The other thing that's been happening is that the prefecture, the state of Fukushima, initiated a health survey of the residents. This is a health survey about radiation. And only 1 out of 5 people have responded. I think there's not trust of government authorities. I mean, 6 months after the accident, you're told, tell us what you ate the morning of the 12th, what size was your plate, where were you that morning, and then at noon, where did you go, et cetera. And people are, I guess, fed up, and there's been a really low response rate. The other thing that we're concerned is that the Fukushima citizens organizations, there are lots of them. One is an organization to protect children from radiation. And they and us, Green Action, and several other groups, we asked the UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights to investigate the violation of human rights of Fukushima children. This was back in the summer last year. And we know that the UN, this office, asked the Japanese government, they wanted to come and investigate, they said, in November and December. But the government refused, or they said they were too busy. And then later on, pretended that they were still waiting for the UN to contact them again, whereas in reality, it was the ball was in Japan's government's court, and the UN was waiting for them to respond. Anyway, the long and the short of it is Japan unfortunately successfully delayed the commission from coming in and investigating human rights violations in Japan until this November. So we're very concerned. This is the year where Japan's human rights record will be investigated, and we really want to address the violation of children's rights.
Eileen Miyoko-Smith, I want to thank you for being with us, joining us from Japan. Saburo Kitajima is with us here in New York, though usually in Japan. He worked at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, and he was a union organizer. Talk about the workers at the nuclear plant where the meltdowns took place.
はい、今、福島第一原発の労働者というのはものすごく大変な環境の中で働いています。
Okay. The workers at the Fukushima plant are currently working under extreme circumstances.
どのように大変かと申しますと、ものすごい低賃金と権利が全くない状況の中で働いています。
To be more specific, the wages are extremely low, and there are no rights being observed at the moment.
被爆の作業をしているにもかかわらず、日給の賃金が本当に、米ドルで本当に12ドルほどの、はい。
Okay, in spite of being exposed to radiation, the levels of wages run to about maybe $100 a day, more or less.
And exactly what were they exposed to, and what continues to happen at these plants? And in the United States, we know very little about what's happening in Japan.
そうですね。私たち就職作業員は日々放射線にさらされていますが、その放射能というのは主に、パイプから出る水、リーキングしている水で被爆していることが多いです。
In the course of our work, the type of work where people are exposed to the highest levels of radiation would be maintaining the water pipes that are being put in place to cool the reactor.
その他にもう福島第一原発の工場の中はそのものが相当汚染されていて地面からはい。
Okay, and of course the entire site is extremely contaminated, and there is radiation that is coming from the ground.
What workers decided to go back into the plant afterwards, knowing how great the exposure would be?
放射線量を知りながら原発に入っていった労働者というのはどんな方ですか？
はい、原発労働者というのはほとんどが仮想の労働者で、自分たちがどれだけ危険な状況にいるのかということについては理解していない人が多いです。
We're talking about workers who have always worked at perhaps the most marginalized jobs, and who oftentimes are not aware of the risks and had no other choice but to go back.
You have been speaking at anti-nuclear protests in the United States. What is your message?
こちらでの反核運動で発言してますけど、メッセージとは具体的にどういうものですか？
はい、私のメッセージは2点あります。福島第一原発の状況を皆さんに、ニューヨークの皆さんに伝えること、そして、今度はそのニューヨークの皆さん方から福島の、無権利にある労働者の権利を獲得する助けをしてほしいことです。
Okay, well, there's two sides to it, and of course I would like to the people who I've met in New York to understand the situation in New York, to communicate what is exactly happening. At the same time, I would like that the people here support and stand with us in our struggles in Fukushima.
And what is your struggle in Fukushima? What are you calling for there?
福島では具体的に何を求めているんですか？
はい、福島の、原発労働者が求めているのは被爆量に見合った正当な給与、そして、健康の将来起こる健康被害に対する保障です。
Okay. For the moment, the workers at the Fukushima plant are demanding that they be compensated for exposure to radiation, which is not happening at the moment, and also kind of a compensation and being looked after after working in these plants, since they must leave in a very short period of time.
And that short period of time is, what is the kind of levels of exposure they have right now?
例えばどれぐらいで 短期間で離れなければいけないとか。
はい、一番、大変な作業をしている労働者は2ヶ月で、もうこの職場を去らなければいけません。
Okay, and in those exposed to the highest levels of radiation must leave the plant in a period of under 2 months.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us. And Saburo Kitashima is in the United States now, but lives in Japan, has worked at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant and is a union organizer there. This is Democracy Now! We're going to continue on lessons learned for U.S. nuclear power plants. Have we learned? We'll be going to a nuclear whistleblower in Vermont. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue on the issue of nuclear power. On Sunday, tens of thousands of anti-nuclear protesters across the globe took their message to the streets to mark the first anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami at Japan's Fukushima power plant. Greenpeace Hong Kong campaigner Prentice Koo was among those voicing their concerns.
Although no one died right now, but everyone can forecast the impact of Fukushima will last for over a decade or even a century. So for Japan, this kind of well-developed country can't even they can't handle a nuclear disaster. So it's really a strong lesson for everyone to know that when nuclear reactors go wrong, no one can control it.
Will, we are going right now to Burlington, Vermont, to speak with Arnie Gundersen, former nuclear industry senior vice president who's coordinated projects at 70 nuclear power plants around the country. Arnie Gundersen provides independent testimony on nuclear and radiation issues to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and congressional and state legislatures, as well as government agencies and officials in the U.S. and abroad. Now chief engineer at Fairwinds Association, he co-wrote the new Greenpeace report, Lessons from Fukushima. What are these lessons, Arnie Gundersen?
Well, I think the first lesson is that this is a technology that can destroy a nation. I was reading Mikhail Gorbachev's memoirs, and he claims that it was Chernobyl, not perestroika, that destroyed the Soviet Union. And as you look at the transcripts coming out of Japan, we see that the Fukushima accident was on the verge of causing the evacuation of Tokyo. And had the wind been blowing the other way, across the island instead of out to sea, Japan would have been cut in half and destroyed as a functional country. So this is a technology where perhaps accidents don't happen every day, but when they do, they can destroy a country. The other things are the cost is astronomical. To fix this is going to be something on the order of $500 billion. All of the money that Japan saved on oil over the 40 years that they've had nuclear plants just got thrown away in the $500 billion recovery effort. And the other piece is the human issues. The health impacts to the Japanese will begin to be felt in several years and out to 30 or 40 years from cancers. And I believe we're going to see as many as a million cancers over the next 30 years because of the Fukushima incident in Japan.
Arnie Gundersen, Fox News host Neil Cavuto spoke with California Republican Congressmember Devin Nunes about what would happen if a tsunami hit a nuclear reactor here in the U.S. I want to go to that clip.
I live close to Diablo Nuclear Power Plant over in the central coast of California, and I've had a lot of questions recently about that. Well, first of all, those reactors are about 100 feet above the sea level. So you would need well over a 100-foot tsunami to even hit those plants. They're actually prepared. They wouldn't have the problem that happened in Japan.
They're prepared.
Arnie Gundersen, your response?
They're not prepared. The tsunami, the myth of the tsunami is that the tsunami destroyed the diesels, and had that not happened, everything would have been fine. What really happened is that the tsunami destroyed the pumps right along the ocean. It doesn't matter that Diablo Canyon plant is up on a hill. The pumps have to be at the ocean because that's where the water is. We call that the loss of the ultimate heat sink. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission hasn't addressed that in the short-term issues coming out of Fukushima. Without that water, the diesels will overheat, and without that water, it's impossible to cool a nuclear core. So as a country, we haven't addressed this issue of the loss of the ultimate heat sink, and we're kicking that can way down the road, not addressing it for years to come.
Can you talk exactly about the nuclear plants in Japan at Fukushima and the nuclear plants now, because 2 were just approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Georgia, despite the dissenting opinion of the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who explicitly said, we have not instituted the safeguards needed since the Fukushima disaster.
Well, the plants in Japan were built actually seismically much tougher than this plant in Georgia. If the plant in Georgia were at Fukushima, it would not have survived the earthquake, let alone the tsunami. The industry's line is that the plants in Georgia would withstand an off-site power loss, which may be true. But the bigger problem is because they have an enormous amount of water on the roof, and seismically that makes it tippy, the plants in Georgia could not have survived the incident that began the entire issue. You know, it really boils down to money, though. These plants are something on the order of $20 billion. And it's taxpayer funded because we've got these loan guarantees in place. So basically, us Vermonters are guaranteeing the loan guarantees to these plants in Georgia. If it weren't for those loan guarantees, these plants wouldn't be built. Nuclear's gotten to the point where it's so expensive that the new nukes are pricing themselves out of the market if it weren't for loan guarantees.
And yet President Obama himself has pushed for these new nuclear power plants, the first 2 in decades. The issue of these loan guarantees pushed by Republicans and Democrats, both deeply concerned about the debt, yet private industry not being able to move forward alone with nuclear power.
You know, left to Wall Street druthers, we subsidize their insurance and we subsidize them on the front end as far as their ability to build these plants. If it were up to Wall Street and this was a real capitalistic country, we wouldn't be building nuclear. We've basically socialized the risks, but any profits flow to the corporations. It's a crazy analogy.
The Mark I containment design that's used in the United States and was used in Japan?
I'm on record as saying that we should close the 23 reactors with the Mark I design. Just 3 weeks before Fukushima, my wife and I were talking, and she said, where's the next accident going to occur? I said, I don't know where, but I know it's going to be in a Mark I design. These containment vents proved to fail 3 times out of 3, and the NRC's response is, well, let's make those vents better. Well, if they just failed 3 times out of 3, it's hard to imagine how to make something like that better. In addition, the fuel is stored on the roof, essentially, in unshielded, unprotected areas, and there's more nuclear cesium-137 in the fuel pool at the plant in Pilgrim, Massachusetts, than was ever released by every nuclear bomb ever exploded in the atmosphere. So we have an enormous inventory of nuclear material way up on the roofs of these buildings. And I think it's time to close these Mark I's down because of those 2 design features.
And finally, Arnie Gunderson, in your home state of Vermont, the governor is trying to shut down the nuclear power plant there, but has been stopped by the company that ran it, Entergy.
We have a federal judge's opinion that the state overstepped its bounds and looked at the safety of the nuclear power plant. It's pretty clear that states can't look at safety, and that's NRC jurisdiction. But the position of the state, and my position is, I was on the panel that evaluated it, we didn't look at safety. We looked at reliability, and we made our decisions based on, do we think a plant that's that old can be reliable in the future? The oldest nuclear plant in the world has only gotten to 47 years.
We have 5 seconds. Arnie Gunderson, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Former nuclear industry senior vice president, coordinated projects at 70 nuclear power plants, speaking to us from Burlington, Vermont. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is